The law firm of Grant and Lively was located on the top floor of a glass tower bathed in afternoon light, where multi-million-dollar contracts were signed in silence and sealed with cold handshakes. Inside the luxurious walnut-paneled room, the scent of French perfume, aged leather-bound paper, and power blended into an atmosphere that was as suffocating as it was elegant. The Dawsons were all present, each holding a glass of champagne, each gaze as sharp as a blade. The door swung open, and everything stopped. An 18-year-old black girl stood in the doorway. Her natural curls are untouched by a flat iron, a plain earth-toned cotton dress with no designer logo, and worn-out shoes with fraying toes. She didn't speak, didn't apologize for entering, didn't look down. She stood there, her deep brown eyes meeting the disdainful glares thrown at her like bullets. "Who let the cleaning staff into the meeting room?" Logan Dawson quipped, half joking, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter broke out from the corner of the table, brief, restrained, but sharp as knives. Chloe, the beautiful niece, who had once been an influencer, whispered to her mother, "Probably one of Uncle William's charity cases. Poor thing, probably here to ask for tuition money." Brianna Taylor still said nothing. She walked in slowly, her shoes making faint clacks against the overly polished wooden floor. Each step felt naked under the scrutiny, the forced smiles and the curiosity laced with prejudice. No one knew who she was. No one wanted to. Only one seat remained unoccupied, the only chair not lined up with the others as if it didn't belong to those who were family. It was placed beside the lawyer's desk as if intentionally positioned, but no one invited her to sit. It was assumed that the seat wasn't meant for a girl like that. The walls were lined with photographs of William Harrison shaking hands with presidents' prestigious medals and certifications from leading global enterprises. Under the golden light, those frames resembled a courtroom without a defense, only default judgments and silent verdicts. Brianna looked up at one of the pictures. In it, William was shaking hands with the black man in a janitor's uniform. She pressed her lips together, then gently placed her handbag beside the empty chair. And just then, the door behind her opened again. An older man walked in. Silver-haired, dressed in a grey suit, holding a worn-out tan leather briefcase. Attorney Ellis Grant has been the Harrison family's loyal legal counsel for over 30 years. He nodded politely to each person, expressionless. Then he looked straight at Brianna, his eyes free of pity. "Ms. Taylor," he said calmly, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat." The room froze. Logan nearly dropped his champagne. Margaret went stiff, her lips pursed like she had swallowed a stone. Brianna pulled out the chair, sat down, back straight, unflinching, head held high. They didn't know that the girl who had just entered wasn't there to beg for scraps of mercy. She had come to reclaim the truth with every ounce of dignity they had tried to deny her. The silence in the room was no longer one of authority, but of confusion and caution. Everyone bearing the Dawson name was now wondering the same thing. Why is a girl like her being invited to sit there? Ellis Grant, the elderly lawyer, often regarded as the stone wall of the family, opened his briefcase and took out a thick stack of documents. He moved slowly, as though every motion had been planned long before, in a scheme no one else in that room had orchestrated. "Before we begin the reading of Mr. William Harrison's last will," he began in a steady, grave tone, "I believe it's time you all were reintroduced to someone from his life, whom quite regrettably most of you deliberately chose to overlook." All eyes turned to Brianna, no longer filled with disdain, but now tinged with apprehension. "This is Brianna Taylor," he said, pausing as though every syllable carried weight. "Daughter of Evelyn Taylor, who served the Harrison household for 15 years as a housekeeper." Chloe exhaled sharply, half laughing scornfully. You mean, the girl who used to clean the kitchen? Why is she even here? Margaret laughed coldly. Another one of my brother's strange acts of pity, calling the help's daughter to witness the rightful inheritance, probably his final lesson in humanity. Mr. Grant didn't respond. He flipped open a photograph clipped inside the file and laid it before each person. It was an image of a 12-year-old girl cleaning a window twice her height, with Evelyn's stooped figure behind her under the harsh sunlight. Brianna has been in that house since she was 12, he continued, accompanying her mother every weekend not to play, but to scrub floors, wash carpets, cook meals. Logan leaned back, scoffing. So what, that doesn't make her part of my family? You're right, Grant replied softly. But none of you were truly family to Mr. William either, not if the standard is humanity, not blood. Jonathan, the eldest son, and once the presumed heir, spoke up, trying to stay composed. Mr. Grant, I don't understand the point of this. This is a private family meeting. And with all due respect, that girl has no connection to us other than having once held a mop inside the estate. Brianna turned to look him straight in the eye, not with anger, not trembling, just with the calm of someone long accustomed to being shut out from the circle of power. You're right, her voice rang out for the first time during the meeting, clear, steady, and each word sinking into the minds of those listening. I was never part of your family dinners, never called by name when Christmas gifts were handed out. No one ever asked me what grade I was in. But in that house I learned something none of you ever did. Silence can sometimes be louder than words. Mr. Grant looked at her with respect. And that, he continued, is why Mr. William Harrison gave her a very special role in today's reading of the will, a role none of you could have imagined. The room turned colder, as if a strange wind had swept through. Chloe quietly pulled out her phone, ducked her head, and typed up a story, "Who does she think she is?" #Willor Circus, unaware that those keystrokes would ignite a wave beyond anyone's control. Mr. Grant turned to the next page. Before I read the official contents, Mr. William asked that everyone watch a short video recorded just 3 days before his passing. The screen on the wall lit up softly, and William Harrison's frail but resolute voice echoed through the room. If you are watching this, then I am gone, and I imagine someone in that room is uncomfortable with the presence of a girl who doesn't look like you. Before you ask, why is she here? I want to ask you another question. Does anyone in that room know her name? Under the warm yellow light, Brianna's face remained unchanged, but in her eyes a spark had begun to rise. A truth was about to be spelled out. A legacy not of blood but justice was about to change hands. The face of William Harrison appeared on the wall-mounted screen, aged gaunt with sunken eyes that still held the sharpness that had once taken him from a roadside fruit vendor to the founder of a national real estate empire. He sat in an old armchair in his study behind him, a wall of shelves lined with thick folders, and on his desk, the only black and white photo, his mother, a black street vendor who once saved him from starvation by splitting a bowl of rice. If you're watching this video, William began slowly, it means I'm no longer sitting among you, wondering if I misjudged someone in my life. The room was dead silent. Chloe put down her phone, Logan fidgeted with his collar, Jonathan clenched his hands, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. I know you're all thinking, why is the daughter of a housekeeper present at the inheritance meeting of a prestigious family like the Dawsons? He paused, his eyes in the video sweeping across the lens as if scanning each person directly. And I also know, he continued, that none of you can answer a simple question, what is her name? Discomfort flickered across their faces. Margaret glanced sideways at Brianna. Jonathan stared at the floor. Chloe sat frozen like a statue. "That girl," William said, "has worked in your home for 6 years. Cleaning the staircases you walk on in Italian leather shoes, cooking the meals you never thanked her for, cleaning the blood from the shoes of the drunk father Chloe hid in her room." Chloe flushed, her mouth open to protest, but no words came. "I watched you all," William said, leaning back, arms folded, starting with the nurse Jonathan yelled at for bringing the wrong juice. The driver Logan called useless in front of friends. The receptionist Margaret had been replaced because her eyes were too empty and impolite. The screen cuts to silent home footage. Jonathan throws documents at his assistant and yells, "Cheap college grads can't do anything right." Margaret glaring at a cleaning lady asking loudly, "Has she been security checked?" Chloe drunk at a party, whispering to a friend, "I don't trust people of color holding my house keys, even if they went to Harvard." Deep breaths, stillness. No one dared speak. "I'm not a perfect man," William said, "but I've lived long enough to know that power blinds and privilege hardens the heart." He looked toward the camera one last time, eyes tired but resolute. "I chose to leave everything to one person, someone who once knelt to scrub floors while others laughed at her, yet still held on to her dignity." The footage ended. The screen went dark. The room sank into silence. Then suddenly, Jonathan leapt up, face red. "No, impossible. This is staged. My father was ill, not in his right mind when he said these things." Ellis Grant didn't blink. "Everything was verified by 3 doctors, 2 legal advisors, and notarized by the state office before his death." She manipulated him," Logan shouted, springing to his feet, pointing at Brianna like she was a thief. But Brianna remained seated, her eyes never left the stack of documents in front of her. She had heard worse in her entire life. She no longer needed to speak. Just her calm gaze in the middle of a storm of pride, fear, and the remnants of old power was enough to crack the room. "I'm not finished," Grant said, his voice lower now. "There is one final video, but before that, I am authorized to read the will's contents officially." He pulled out a thick envelope sealed with the Harrison crest in red wax. All eyes turned to him, and across the room, Brianna Taylor slowly clenched her hands in her lap. Not out of fear, but because she knew the truth could no longer be denied. Ellis Grant lifted the paper rich with the scent of old ink. His hands did not tremble, but his gaze deepened. He wasn't just the reader of a will. He witnessed a transformation, not just of ownership, but of an entire value system. "I, William Harrison, of sound mind and body, leave this final will." No one moved. "All 51% of shares in Harrison Enterprises, the primary estate at Aurora Hills, along with all properties listed in Appendix A, and $20 million in independent investment accounts. I leave it all to Brianna Evelyn Taylor." "No." Margaret's voice nearly ripped the ceiling. Jonathan slammed the table, shattering a glass red wine splashing onto his tailored Italian shirt. "This is fraud. Who does she think she is to be considered worthy?" Brianna slowly turned to look at him. Her voice wasn't loud, but clear as a silver bell. "Or is it just that my skin isn't white enough to be included in William's inheritance?" The room congealed into stillness. Chloe's mouth hung open. Logan collapsed into his chair, lips pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "There are conditions," Grant continued evenly. "Brianna will not assume direct control until she turns 21. Until then, the company will be overseen by a supervisory board of Dr. Olivia Carter and me." "Doctor who?" Margaret snapped. As if on cue, the meeting room door opened once more. A black woman in her 50s walked in a deep purple suit, composed face, eyes that had seen too much. Every step she took had weight not from status, but from belonging, as if the room had long waited for her arrival. Dr. Olivia Carter, Grant introduced. She cared for Mr. William during his final days and was the one who introduced Brianna to him. "We met," Olivia said slowly, "when I found her crying on the hospital staircase after being denied a medication advance for her mother by Jonathan Dawson himself." Jonathan lowered his head, not regretfully, but in recognition that denial was no longer an option. "I went to school with her mother, Evelyn Taylor," Olivia continued, locking eyes with Margaret, "whom you dismissed for being a burden to the refined atmosphere of the estate. Due to her illness." Margaret said nothing, her bejeweled hands clenched together as if trying to crush the guilt seeping in. "William did not choose an heir by bloodline," Olivia continued, "but by heart." Mr. Grant stepped forward and placed a thick, handwritten letter before Brianna. "His final letter, just for you." Brianna didn't open it. She looked up at all those who had once judged her like a shadow. "I didn't come here to hurt them," she said, voice steady, each word sharp as a blade. "I came to remind them that while they sat at million-dollar dining tables, others below them were carrying entire families without a word of complaint." Jonathan surged forward, finger pointed in accusation. "You think you can run this empire with a few tears and a cheap video clip?" Just then, two men in black suits appeared at the edge of the room, silent but unmistakably present. Mr. Grant spoke gently. "I was granted full authority to protect the estate and ensure Ms. Brianna faces no physical or reputational threats. These gentlemen are security coordinators appointed by Mr. William." Jonathan froze. Lips trembling, he uttered something no one expected. "This is a coup within my own family." Brianna didn't respond. At age 12, she pulled a photo from her purse, standing beside her mother outside the Harrison estate. Her small hands gripped a mop nearly her size. She placed the photo on the table. "I don't need to overthrow anyone," she said, looking each of them in the eye. "Your arrogance overthrew yourselves." No one in that room dared to breathe. Even Jonathan, who had just screamed as if his crown had been stolen, leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Brianna Taylor. Not out of fear, but because for the first time he wasn't sure who he was facing. Mr. Ellis Grant opened a second file box, a small silver USB labeled in handwriting, "Play only if contested." He glanced around the room, then silently plugged it into the screen's input port. The screen flickered to life once more. William Harrison appeared again, visibly thinner, his gaze foggier, but his voice unshaken. "If this video plays, some of you are trying to deny my decision. And that comes as no surprise. I am William Harrison. I own this company, every cough, every criticism, every contract, and I decide who will carry it forward. I didn't leave everything to Brianna because she moved me. I left it to her because she made me ashamed. Ashamed that the only person in the house who knew every employee's name was a girl who was never invited to sit at the table." The footage shifted to a series of silent home security clips. Logan berates an elderly driver for parking a few inches off. Chloe whispering at a party, "I don't trust people of color with money. They're better suited for logistics." Margaret fired Evelyn Taylor for bringing the smell of hospital medication into the aesthetic of the mansion. Jonathan, with his arrogant face, pushes Brianna in the hallway after she asks for a leave slip to take her mother to surgery. Back to the screen. William continued, "I recorded it all, not to shame you, but so you would confront yourselves." And for anyone saying Brianna isn't worthy, I ask instead, what have you done to prove you are? Brianna refused my offer 3 times. She didn't want revenge, she wanted change. Her words made me change the will at the last minute. The video cuts to a clip in the study. Brianna was speaking to William in a uniform shirt, eyes red. Her voice trembled but held firm. You can leave me whatever you wish. But if I use it to crush those who crushed me, then I'm no better than they are. William lowered his head in the video, nodding slowly. I don't want a new world that just swaps out the rulers. I want to change the system that breeds injustice from within. The screen faded to black. No one moved. The luxurious room now felt too small for egos cracking under pressure. Brianna stood. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to retaliate. Her silence was a new kind of power, the power of reason, morality, and a memory that had survived every trampling. I've reviewed all the files, she said, and I've made my first decision as the majority owner of Harrison Enterprises. Heads lifted. I have signed the transfer of all land in the Slater district once exploited for commercial development by Mr. William, back to 187 families who were forcibly displaced without compensation. And I have approved compensation packages for all employees unlawfully terminated over the past 10 years, including back pay insurance and the option to return if they choose. Logan shouted, "You're destroying this company." "I'm not destroying anything," Brianna replied, eyes locked. "I'm rebuilding it from the foundation." She turned to Mr. Grant. "Prepare a press release. I want everything announced simultaneously on the company website and to the media, no concealment." In the corner, Chloe began to cry. Jonathan clenched his fists, grinding his teeth. Margaret, Rose quietly left the room without a word, knowing there are battles you lose simply by losing your character. Brianna returned to the room, once a battlefield for titans of industry, now a silent court of justice. And she knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Just hours after the will was revealed, the offices of Grant and Lively fell into an eerie calm. The scornful remarks, shouting, and disdain wrapped in tailored suits all faded into muted echoes. Brianna Taylor, no longer the girl with the mop, was rewriting the hierarchy. An emergency board meeting was held in the executive suite on the 51st floor of Harrison Enterprises, a room once reserved only for Dawsons and Ivy League alums. That changed forever today. The glass doors opened. 5 people entered. No designer suits, no Rolex watches, no Hermes bags. Just plain shirts and carefully pressed work uniforms. But each step they took was backed by decades of unseen labor. Brianna stood up smiling and introduced herself. "Hello. This is the new interim board of Harrison Enterprises." Logan nearly dropped his coffee. Chloe stared almost in disbelief. Still seated at the end of the table, Jonathan dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, his face pale. "You remember me, don't you, Jonathan?" A silver-haired man with a deep voice spoke. "Raymond Brooks, Finance Department, 25 years, fired for proposing profit sharing with employees." "Ms. Olivia," Brianna nodded, "will oversee human resources and corporate ethics. Mr. Raymond will manage the finances. Ms. Sarah, who cleaned headquarters for 10 years, will serve as employee liaison, directly receiving staff input. Each person, each story, each exclusion from the old table was now brought back, not for revenge, but for restoration." "You can't do this," Logan erupted. "This is a family company. You can't bring these nobodies in as directors." Brianna turned. Her gaze wasn't angry, but it was sharp enough to slice away the rot. "They are not nobodies. They are the ones who held William's empire together long before it crumbled. You just never bothered to look down. Chloe lowered her head, silent. Huddled in the corner of the table, Margaret was now overwhelmed by something rare shame. Jonathan scoffed, "Fine. You can stage your little revolution, but you can't run a billion-dollar company without experience." "You're right." Brianna didn't flinch. "I have no experience, but I don't intend to do it alone." She pressed a button on the table. The door opened. 5 more people entered. A brown-skinned woman, a former chief engineer, was forced out for protesting gender discrimination. An Asian American man once suggested a fair audit system, dismissed for being short-sighted. A white man once a security guard, but so good at tech that he scared his superiors. Brianna turned to them all. "I'm not rebuilding Harrison with might, I'm rebuilding it with merit." "You're destroying everything," Logan screamed. "Everything our father built." "No," Brianna said, strolling to the window overlooking the city below. "I'm not destroying William's legacy, I'm saving it." She turned back for the first time, her voice rising above the cold space. "He didn't leave me a company. He left me a message, and I am responsible for turning that message into action." "From today onward," she declared, "Harrison Enterprises will no longer be synonymous with silent injustice. It will symbolize transformation, where the forgotten hand is finally placed where it belongs, on the decision-making table." Less than 24 hours after the announcement of the new board, the name Brianna Taylor covered every front-page social media feed and broadcast channel. From top-tier financial outlets like the Financial Tribune and Wall Street Ledger to entertainment platforms that had never once cared about a girl who mopped boardroom floors, all jumped into the fray. 18-year-old black girl inherits billion-dollar empire. Uncredentialed heir shakes up old money capitalism. From mop to boardroom, the rise of Brianna Taylor. Each headline was a blade not aimed at Brianna, but at the crumbling image the elite had long crafted, that power came from pedigree, bloodlines, and prestigious schools. Brianna sat across from a panel of international journalists at Harrison Enterprises HQ. Her face wore no heavy makeup. Her natural curls were tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her white button-up shirt fastened to the top. Simple attire, but her presence was anything but. A French reporter spoke through a translator. "Just one question, Ms. Taylor. Why did you not choose to punish the Dawson family? They hurt you deeply, didn't they?" Brianna lifted her eyes, staring into the camera as if peering through the screen into every living room worldwide. "Because punishment doesn't change systems," she said. "It only switches who gets stepped on." Meanwhile, outside, Logan Dawson, now a minority shareholder, was making podcast and talk show rounds, painting Brianna as a naive girl, brainwashed by anti-corporate ideology. Margaret avoided the press, but quietly funded a legal group, aiming to sue Brianna for exploiting influence over a dying man. Jonathan withdrew from corporate life, but filed for an investigation into the new board's legitimacy. What none of them anticipated was the public wave. In the slums of the city's east side, once slated for Harrison development, hundreds of families received free legal ownership certificates. The houses were repainted. New signs read, "This is your land," and the beginning of a new chapter. On social media, Brianna's video declaration, "I don't want money, I want justice," reached over 48 million views in just 2 days. A former warehouse worker posted, "I got fired for taking 3 days off to take my mum to chemo. Today I was invited back with full benefits and restitution. Thank you, Brianna Taylor. You didn't inherit a fortune. You inherited a conscience." Harrison Enterprises began being dubbed in financial circles as the first morality rebuilt company of the 21st century. But the brighter the light, the longer the shadow. Conservative investors grew uneasy. Some shares dipped slightly over fears of excessive social policy. One far-right paper blared, "A mop girl is playing with thousands of livelihoods." Brianna knew this storm was inevitable. She called the whole board to a Friday evening meeting. No fancy wood tables, no vintage wine, just a whiteboard, a projector, and many challenging questions. "I don't need to please everyone," she told her advisors. "I need to do what is right and prove that justice doesn't collapse markets. It makes them ethical." She turned to Raymond. "I want the next quarterly report to show all costs, reparations, community support, retraining, and the potential profit when people feel truly respected." Raymond nodded, his eyes warm like seeing his younger self 2 decades ago, but he wasn't sidelined this time. He was trusted. Brianna stepped out to the balcony. The city lights below had begun to flicker on. But tonight, instead of casting loneliness over her as they once did, they blinked with something else, hope. She knew she hadn't won. She knew the old mindsets hadn't vanished. But today, a value system has shifted. And that was the first step toward a transformation larger than any fortune. A grey October morning. Low clouds kissed the windows of the 51st floor. Emails flooded Harrison's inbox, including job applications, thank you notes, and partnership requests from non-profits across the U.S. But among them sat a paper file on Brianna Taylor's desk. No title, no logo, just one handwritten line: reintegration program, resubmission request. Brianna opened it. Her expression slowly changed. Inside were 3 applications. Jonathan Dawson, 32, requests to join the Community Coordination Training Program. Margaret Dawson, 56, is volunteering to co-teach soft skills at the West Suburban Youth Center. And finally, Logan Dawson, 28, who once rejected every offer and shamed her publicly, now silently submitted a handwritten letter asking to start again from zero. She closed the file. Her eyes lifted to the wide glass window. The city still moved, but something inside her went still. On the ground floor in the new community hub of the company, a group of students was rehearsing civic presentations. Sticky notes covered the walls. Justice has no fixed face. Everyone deserves a chance to make it right. The question is, do you look up or look back? Brianna walked downstairs, stood behind the glass door. Inside, Margaret Dawson, hair tied back in a plain white blouse, held a marker writing on the board. "What does it mean to be seen?" A few students answered. Margaret smiled, gently tilted her head, and glanced toward the window. Her eyes met Brianna's. No wave, no rush to explain, just a slight nod, the kind of nod from someone who had finally understood what she once denied. That afternoon, Brianna entered the private meeting room where Jonathan and Logan were waiting. No suits, no ties, just 2 men, stripped of illusions about entitlement. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Jonathan began. "I'm here to ask to learn again." "I still don't fully understand you," Logan said hoarsely, "but I've learned one thing. What we called strength was just fear of being seen as ordinary." Brianna sat silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out 3 sealed envelopes. "Inside," she said, "are 3-month trial contracts. Each of you will have a specific job under board supervision." Jonathan opened his. His eyes narrowed at the first line, title: Documentation Assistant, Reintegration Program for Families Displaced in 2005. Logan stayed quiet. "My job is to receive complaints from citizens. You'll sit across from people who lost homes and jobs because of this company," Brianna said bluntly. "And you will listen. No defending, no explaining, just listen. Both men looked up. In the eyes once full of pride and disdain now shimmered something that looked like humility. That night, Brianna sat alone on the company rooftop. The city lights blurred through the mist. Beside her sat Dr. Olivia Carter, the woman who had quietly supported her from the start. "What troubles you?" Olivia asked. "Am I going soft?" Brianna sighed. "Does justice have room for mercy, or is it always black and white?" Dr. Olivia smiled, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "True justice," she said, "isn't about punishing the wrong. It's about creating conditions where wrong cannot continue. And sometimes that begins with an unlocked door." Brianna nodded, looked up at the grey sky. A breeze brushed past. No one knew what the coming months would hold. But at that moment, she believed that no one is born to be wrong forever. All it takes is someone brave enough to break the cycle, not with fists, but with a chance. A year had passed since the day William Harrison's will was read aloud in a room heavy with prejudice and greed. A year since the moment Brianna Taylor, the black girl, once called the maid's daughter, sat down at the table of power without asking anyone's permission to be there. And today, on the first anniversary, Harrison Enterprises is no longer just the name of a corporation. It had become a definition. On the ground floor of its headquarters, once a cold marble atrium, now stood the Brianna Taylor Community Center, offering free classes in personal finance, civil rights, and entrepreneurship to hundreds of young people from areas once labeled underserved. The oil portraits of the company's original shareholders had been taken down, replaced by works from young artists hailing from low-income neighborhoods, painting the city's forgotten history through the eyes of those who had lived it. In the executive office, Brianna Taylor, 19, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a crisp white shirt and grey slacks, reviewed the latest quarterly report with Raymond Brooks, now the company's chief financial officer. Net profit is up 14% from this time last year, Raymond reported, unable to hide his smile. The employee profit-sharing program has led to the highest retention rate in the company's history. And market response, "They no longer call us the stolen company," he said, eyes gleaming. "They're calling us a regenerative enterprise, a model for the new century." Outside in a neighborhood once embroiled in land disputes, now a legalized residential zone, those previously displaced by Harrison Enterprises were handed unconditional land ownership certificates. For many families, it was the first time they truly had a home. One of the people distributing those certificates was Logan Dawson, now a community recovery program associate, dressed in a simple t-shirt, bending down to hand papers to an older woman he had once scorned. "Thank you," the old woman said, eyes misty. "Not for the land, but for seeing me as a human being." Logan was speechless. For the first time, he wasn't the heir, he was the reborn. At a small cafe in the city center, Jonathan Dawson, in a grey shirt and holding an iPad, was guiding a group of interns in preparing legal aid files for people who had lost their property rights, and beside him sat Chloe, no longer an influencer, now heading the anti-discrimination content team in the company's media division. She smiled softly when Brianna walked into the cafe. "We still can't believe this is real life," Chloe said, "but I've also never seen Jonathan smile at a person of color before." Jonathan shot her a look, but then chuckled. "Maybe because I finally realized I'm not the center of the universe." That evening, in the newly built auditorium of the William Harrison Institute for Justice and Social Equity, hundreds gathered for the one-year Reconstruction commemoration. Students sat beside shareholders, construction workers next to executives. White, Black, Latinx, and Asian children stood together, singing the closing song of the program. Brianna stepped onto the stage. She didn't give a speech. She told a story. About her first day mopping floors in the Harrison mansion, about the first time someone called her invisible, and about the day William Harrison, on his final breath, had said to her, "I used to think justice was about who wins. Now I know, justice is about who isn't forgotten." She looked out at the audience, into the faces of those who had once hurt her and those no one had ever seen. "We didn't erase the past," she said. "We added a chapter that should have been there from the start, the chapter of fairness." The entire room stood. No one clapped too loudly, but tears quietly fell across many rows. An early spring morning. The city was still veiled in a light mist, sunlight filtering through glass towers like a dream not yet fully awake. But on the top floor of what was once Harrison Enterprises, now renamed the Equitas Center, a meeting was underway, unlike any shareholders' meeting ever held. There were no financial statements on the screen, no growth charts or quarterly graphs. Instead, on the wall hung a large map of the United States, marked with hundreds of tiny glowing dots, each representing a community being rebuilt under the Enterprise for Social Equity model pioneered by Brianna. Now 20 years old, Brianna Taylor walked into the room. She carried no briefcase, only a notebook, a pen, and a decision forged over the past year. She looked around the room. The people who had once been shut out of power are now managers. Those who once held executive chairs are now humble advisors. And between them, a balance that needed no name tags to be validated. Today, she began, "I'm not here to announce a new business strategy. I'm here to pass on power." The room froze. "I will step down as executive chair of the Equitas Center." A murmur rippled through the room, surprise, worry. Chloe looked at her on the verge of tears. Jonathan gripped the edge of his chair, but Brianna's gaze remained steady. "I never came here to rule forever. I came to change things. And now it's time to hand over this role to a new leadership group of individuals from the communities we once overlooked, so they can carry this mission forward with the values we've planted." She pulled out a list and began reading the names of her successors. None bore the name Dawson. None were Ivy League graduates. But each carried real-life experience and a heart that never forgot what was right. A few days later at Riverfront High School, once the center of a racial discrimination case, 15 years ago, Brianna stood in the middle of the schoolyard in front of 500 students and dozens of teachers. She didn't wear a blazer, just a simple brown coat. And the scarf her mother, Evelyn Taylor, had worn throughout the winter. She was diagnosed with cancer. Holding a microphone, she began, "In high school, I once dreamed of becoming a lawyer, to protect the vulnerable. But I've learned, not everyone vulnerable needs a lawyer. They need someone to sit down, look them in the eyes and say, 'I see you, and I believe you deserve more.'" The entire yard fell silent. She pointed to the front row, where a skinny Hispanic boy nervously glanced around. "What's your name?" "Diego," he answered quietly. "What's your dream, Diego?" "I want to be an engineer, but I don't know where to start." Brianna smiled. "Then you start with someone who believes in you, and today that person is me." The schoolyard erupted. But Brianna bowed her head gently, like someone who had just done the most ordinary thing in the world, to offer the gaze she once longed to receive. A year later, Brianna's equity enterprise model had spread to 38 states. Thousands of individuals who were once fired due to bias were now working in companies led by transparency and trust. Universities began teaching the model as a moral revolution in modern business. In one final interview, a journalist asked Brianna, "What made you give up power? Instead of holding on at your peak?" She looked straight into the camera without hesitation. "Because I don't believe in peaks. I believe in depth. And depth only comes when you know how to step back so others can step forward. Discrimination, privilege, silent complicity. Those forces that once made a girl bow her head and scrub the floors in a house where no one remembered her name had not vanished. But now the world had a name to remember. Breonna Taylor. Not as a symbol, but as a full stop to silence and a beginning for everyone who was once called invisible.